Day one of accused child murderer David's preliminary hearing. Body cam footage, crime scene photos, the singer looking bored in court. We are breaking down everything that happened in that morning session with a reporter who was in that courtroom and saw it all. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. You know how we talk about on Sidebar all the dangers in the world? I mean, we really focus on that. This is something you might not be thinking about. Being a part of a data breach. Yeah, you, your loved ones, all that private information constantly at risk of being leaked, which is why I want all of you to keep your data safe online. Here's how it works. Incogni. Incogni tracks down all those old posts and search sites exposing your information, and then they demand its removal. Look, I was shocked. Turns out databases had all my information, and within days, Incogni was taking it down. The setup is super simple. You just create an account. Incogni is going to do the rest. And their unlimited plans custom removals feature lets you submit specific links that their privacy experts will personally investigate and remove. They can't harm you if they can't find you. Use code SIDEBAR at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/sidebar. Okay, so here we are. 10 months or so after the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found in the front trunk of a Tesla, allegedly registered to David out in LA, the 21-year-old singer is now at his preliminary hearing. Day one of a multi-day hearing where the judge, will determine if there is sufficient evidence for his criminal case to move to trial. We're going to cover each day, what happens, condense it all for you so you don't miss anything. We have a reporter who's in the courtroom who's going to lay out everything for us, because here's the issue. We can't see it. There's no cameras allowed. There's no audio equipment, but she is our eyes and our ears. So let's not forget, David is currently charged with first-degree murder, continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, unlawful mutilation of human remains, all in connection with the death of Celeste. Prosecutors allege that he was in a sexual relationship with her and that he killed her to keep her quiet. And then he tried to cover it all up and dismembered her body. He has entered a not guilty plea, and he is innocent unless proven guilty. Let's go right into it. Okay, so a lot to get into. Let me bring in our eyes and ears. She was in the courtroom this morning. NBC LA reporter Julia Deng. Julia, thank you so much for coming on. I know you have limited time because you have to jump back into the courtroom. Can you just set the scene? I mean, who was there? I understand Celeste's family was there, and then we'll talk about David's appearance. But set the scene, if you can, for what was it like in that courtroom and who was there.
Jesse, it has been hectic this morning. It's kind of a media circus outside the courthouse here. As I'm sure you can imagine, everybody is covering this. This is the biggest development in this murder case against David Anthony Burke so far, the 21-year-old known as D4vd, David. And yes, that is correct. The victim's parents, Celeste Rivas Hernandez, her parents were actually in the courthouse this morning. They were sitting in the courtroom during the very start of this preliminary hearing, just 3 rows directly in front of me. So I couldn't see their facial expressions, but I think the way they were moving and kind of huddling with each other as evidence photos were shown to the courts, I think that says it all. We saw some really grisly evidence this morning, Jesse, as part of the prosecution's summary of the evidence that they plan to present if this case ultimately goes to trial. And just backing up here, that's what this preliminary hearing is doing. It's an opportunity for the courts and the judge to decide whether the prosecution actually has a strong enough case against David for this to go to trial. So we've heard it called, kind of like a mini trial. It's not really that. If anything, it's like a mini bench trial because there's no jury this time. There's no impartial jury. It is just the judge deciding whether or not there is probable cause here for this to go to trial. And that is legally a much lower threshold than having to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that David did in fact commit these crimes. And as we've been reporting, it's not just first-degree murder. There are 2 additional felonies he's being charged with here, including the continuous sexual abuse of that child, teenager Celeste, and a mutilation of make.
Let me ask you about David real quick. He's brought into the courtroom. I understand there was a whole back and forth about whether or not he should be shackled. There's no jury there, so it's not like seeing him in handcuffs or prison garb would necessarily prejudice a jury. But I know there was that issue. And then I was reading your notes, and you had one note that really stuck out to me, where you said he looked bored in court.
He did. So I couldn't see the victim's parents because they were sitting right in front of me, but I could see David. And we've talked about his demeanor in the courtroom during court proceedings before. We've talked about how, he's kind of glib. He smiled at the attorneys and the judge. He speaks, right, very clearly, very confidently. He spoke this morning. He said, "Yes, Your Honor," after she was done reviewing rules with him for this preliminary hearing. But yeah, there was a moment during the back and forth, during the initial cross-examination of witnesses, where he was kind of resting his face between his hands. And yeah, he looked a little bit bored, Jesse. But what really caught my attention was how during the presentation of these evidentiary photos, that before today, we've only seen descriptions. We haven't seen these photos yet, us reporters covering this case, but we actually saw the victim's remains. I don't think I have the words to accurately describe the energy in the courtroom when the prosecution presented those photos. There was an intake of breath, and the sounds that we were hearing before, which was a lot of typing, a lot of shuffling, everybody taking notes. It got a little bit silent for a moment there, because we could actually see the head and torso in an unzipped cadaver bag in the front trunk of a Tesla. We could see arms and legs chopped up in a second bag. It was like a black garbage bag with blue handles. And during all of this, Jesse, David was just sitting there staring at the screen, staring at these photos, blinking. There was no reaction, no visible reaction on the defendant's face until, this struck me too, until the prosecution pulled up a side-by-side. It was two photos, and they showed the victim's two hands. Left hand, as we know, missing two fingers, ring finger and the pinky finger, and then her right hand, and her right index finger was pulled, a little bit like that, with a tattoo on it that read SHH. When that photo was pulled up, you could see David kind of leaning in, still staring at the photos. But beyond that, not much emotion on his face during most of the proceedings today.
And that's a really, really chilling description, and also goes to how they were able to identify the remains. Before we go back to the beginning of this hearing, because I think something important happened regarding body camera, and I'll get to that. What was Celeste's family's reaction to seeing these photos, of Celeste's dismembered body?
I don't know, Jesse. If I could put myself in their shoes, I can tell you what I noticed. I'm sitting 3 rows directly behind them in that courtroom, looking at the same photos. I could see both of them, mother and father, bowing their heads. I could see them scooting a little bit closer together, and I could see a female. I believe it was a staffer from the DA's office, sitting on the other side of the victim's mother, putting her arm around her and appearing to comfort her. I actually ran into the victim's mother during a 15-minute court break this morning in the ladies' room. Her eyes were red, and there really are no words. But at the end of the day, Jesse, all of this coverage surrounding David, the entire media circus here, every crew that has been camped out outside of this courthouse trying to get a seat in that courtroom, covering this case, it's all about Celeste. It's all about justice for this victim. And that's why these court proceedings are dragging on kind of the way they are and why they're being so careful to do this properly. Because the defendant is still innocent until proven guilty. And the prosecution, of course, wants to ensure that he gets a fair, just trial if this ultimately does go to trial.
And Julia, you said something very interesting. I mean, aside from the fact about how incredibly heartbreaking it is to be thinking about this family having to view all this, you talked about the prosecution doing this properly. I thought it was really interesting how they even began this preliminary hearing with calling this senior deputy Juan Gonzalez. They didn't focus on the crime scene first. They focused all the way back in 2024 with David, the police going to his home to ask him about Celeste disappearing and what he knew about Celeste. And this is the first time that I ever heard about this. And you tell me you watched it for yourself. There was body camera footage from officers who confronted him and went to his residence, right? What was that footage?
It was about 10 minutes. Yes, body cam footage. Showing this senior deputy from the LA County Sheriff's Department who was assigned to do a welfare check at that home in the Hollywood Hills, along with his partner who he met at the house. And the first thing I noticed, because I've seen David in the courtroom several times now, the first thing I noted was just his demeanor, right? He is disarmingly charming. In this video clip, he lets the deputies in. He's laughing and joking with them. He's just casual. He's eating, I think, a bag of chips. He's got something wrapped around his hair. He's chilling at home. And the way this deputy described it on the stand during cross this morning was that David was very cooperative. And he told them at one point during this video, hey guys, I've got alcohol in the fridge. And the deputy responded. You can hear him on the body cam video recording. That's all good. That's not what we're here for. They made it clear they were just looking for this girl, this missing girl from Lake Elsinore. There was a back and forth, caught on video, caught on that body cam that we watched in court as part of this 10 or so minute long recording about her age. And David states on that video, she told him she was 18 and was informed at that point that she was in fact 13. And there was an exchange where the senior deputy doing this search asks David, well, does she look 13? So that Q&A, that video recording, that hard evidence, I definitely expect that to come back up during the actual trial, if this ultimately does go to trial.
I even read from your notes the defense was really homing in on that, right? The idea that he was cooperative, that he thought she was 18 years old. But, the prosecution is basically saying, the way I understand it from that footage, he wasn't being honest about their relationship. He wasn't being honest about the last time he saw her, what he knew about her. And so you could see the value of that kind of footage and the time frame, because they claim that he had been in a relationship with her and met her, and I think in 2022, and been in a relationship with her since 2023. I want to ask you about this other witness who testified, one of the lead investigators, I believe, Josh Byers, right? And I actually previewed in our preview episode of the preliminary hearing, I thought that they might call him. What did Josh Byers have to say?
So they were actually in the middle of questioning this detective from LAPD. So different agency here. This is the city police department leading the homicide investigation. He is from their robbery and homicide division. So they were in the middle on back and forth, establishing his credibility essentially as a witness when the judge called for this lunch break. But Joshua Byers, this detective from LAPD, is the one describing what he found in that Tesla when he was called to the Hollywood tow yard. And I think this part of cross, Jesse, during the preliminary hearing is going to take a little bit of time, because even though this detective is just doing his job that he has done for many years and telling us what he saw and what he did as a part of his job, it's shocking. It is absolutely shocking. And I actually overheard a conversation between two film producers, two members of the media in the hallway during that break earlier about how startling it was to them when the evidentiary photos showing the victim's remains were presented really without much preamble. So he's in the middle of describing all of that right now and then talking about the search warrant that he obtained to search David's house, the devices they recovered from that house, how they were able to link those devices to the Tesla, how they were able to establish the Tesla was driven by David until well after the victim was killed, and also the conversation that he had with a man sitting in the courthouse, Jesus Rivas, the victim's father, and how he talked to the father through an interpreter, his son, and how he requested contact information for the victim's dentist so the medical examiner could reach out and compare those dental records because there was no other way to positively identify her. He told the court how by the time he got there and found the two cadaver bags in the front trunk of that Tesla, there was so much decomposition. There was so much skin slippage. They couldn't identify any facial features.
Julia, thank you so much. I know it's getting loud there. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Now, there was somebody that jumped on a loudspeaker, so it was kind of hard to hear a few of the things that Julia was saying, and I know there was more she wanted to get into, but I have her notes here. One thing I'll just mention, it was interesting how the prosecution started out by focusing on the disappearance of Celeste back in 2024. Remember, there were claims that she was a runaway because they seemed to be trying to establish this alleged sexual relationship, that David wasn't honest or allegedly wasn't honest about what his relationship was like with Celeste. That's the way that I view it, and kind of chronological, right? You go all the way back to the Riverside County investigation, and then you go into what happened out in LA. Now, just some notes I want to highlight from, this is Julia's notes that she gave us. Talking about Detective Byers or Investigator Byers, yes, that Jesus Rivas did call LAPD on September 10th about his missing daughter. This was a call that was forwarded to Byers. She indicated there were media helicopters that day, that the media attempted to follow the investigators, and Julia actually noted she was in one of those helicopters that day, that Byers had spoke with Jesus Rivera, that his son was an interpreter, that there was a belief that he thought those remains were his daughter. It's just heartbreaking to be thinking about that. They talked about searching this rental property where David was staying at, and that there was a car registered to Robert Morganroth. This is David's assistant, somebody who worked with him. There was evidence that was collected from the interior of the residences, including multiple devices, computer towers, phones. Byers also described this unopened burn box that was found at this place, kind of like a mini crematorium, that it's used to burn items to nothing. Now, no indication as far as we can see that that was used to actually inflict some sort of impact on Celeste's body, but it could go to the idea there was preparations to dispose of her remains. I imagine that's going to be something they go with. And then this was interesting that Byers described reviewing United Airlines records showing flights purchased by David for himself and Celeste for these trips from Los Angeles to Texas, London. So again, goes to this idea of a continuous sexual relationship, maybe other witnesses who observed anything like this. Now, one other thing I have to highlight is as this went to a lunch break, District Attorney Nathan Hochman held a short press conference outside of the courthouse to talk about the preliminary hearing and about whether or not they are going to pursue the death penalty in this case. Take a look.
Good afternoon. My name is Nathan Hochman. I'm the Los Angeles County District Attorney. Today starts the day of the preliminary hearing of David Anthony Burke, the singer David, spelled D4vd. This preliminary hearing will last approximately 3 to 5 days, at which point we will be seeking to hold David to answer for 3 felony counts of which he has been charged. First-degree murder with special circumstances, the count of lewd and lascivious acts with a 13-year-old, and the count of mutilation of human remains. David will be facing a maximum punishment of life without the possibility of parole, or he is also death penalty eligible. The decision on whether or not to seek the death penalty has not been made at this point. Now, the point of a preliminary hearing is somewhat different than you actually perceive in the media, whether it's TV or the movies. Because what often happens in TV or the movies is you go from an immediate arrest into a trial. But in our system and in California in particular, you have an intermediate step. That intermediate step is a preliminary hearing where effectively the prosecution's evidence is going to be tested before a judge, not a jury. The standard that we have to meet is not beyond a reasonable doubt at the preliminary hearing stage. It is probable cause. We are not obligated, nor will we be presenting all the evidence at a preliminary hearing that we will be presenting at a trial to prove David beyond a reasonable doubt guilty of the 3 felony charges of which he has been charged. So at the preliminary hearing, we will call a number of officers. We estimate there'll be over 10 different witnesses, both officer testimony, coroner testimony, and there'll be individual witnesses as well. And again, we can rely on hearsay and other things that won't be allowed to be relied on in an actual trial. The judge at the end of the presentation of the evidence, and again, this is evidence that can be cross-examined by a defense attorney, and that process has already been begun. At the end of the presentation of all this evidence, the question will be, will David be held to answer on the 3 felony charges? We believe we will more than accomplish the evidentiary burden of probable cause at this point to hold David to answer on these 3 felony charges. At that point, if the judge does hold him to answer, we will file an information that will detail the actual 3 criminal charges. Thereafter, there will be a trial date that will be set, and David, if he so chooses, will proceed to trial. And we will prove at that point, beyond a reasonable doubt, that David committed these 3 crimes. And when, and we do not predict if, when he is convicted, we will then be seeking the sentence that we are allowed to seek by order of law, and we will let you know in a future date whether or not that sentence will also include the death penalty. So I wanted to take this opportunity as we're starting this preliminary hearing process to explain where the preliminary hearing fits in the process so people can understand as we are presenting evidence and it is being cross-examined what ultimately the standard is for the judge to determine, and that's probable cause, not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is a judge that is doing this determination, not a jury at this point, and that there will subsequently be a trial when the judge holds David to answer on these 3 felony charges. When this preliminary hearing is over, I will come back to address you, and at that point, I will take questions. Thank you very much.
Not surprising. I think they want to lay out the case, see what the court does, and then there may be even discussions between them and the defense about, do you want this to go to trial? Can we work out a deal maybe where we take the death penalty off, even though there's a moratorium on executions, and he pleads guilty, maybe life in prison, something I've been wondering about. We'll see. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you next time, everybody.